Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Pearson. I'm coordinating the efforts of the International Humanistic Management Association and am a professor at Fordham University, which has recently started a project that's called Transforming Business Education. And it's trying to get, or it's coordinating the Jesuit universities to align their teaching in business schools with the agenda of Laudato Si, or Catholic social teaching, or the integral human development agenda. So this is the bigger frame. This is why Fordham University is sponsoring these conversations. And I just want you to know about this possibility because there are 100+ Jesuit schools out there. I know there are other schools that are not in the Catholic or in any kind of spiritual sort of domain interested in working on this, and Stuart Hart agreed to join us today to share the experiences at the University of Vermont of how they were able to pull a program together that is already, I think, a lot aligned with the SDGs and enabling the next generation to deliver on business education for the common good, if we want to sort of frame it that way. So I'm very grateful for all of you here, and for Stu to help us out with this conversation and share his experiences. So much of this conversation is really framed around what can we learn from the experience there. And I encourage you all to ask your questions in the chat. Depending on how many there will be, we will be able to sort of just have a more organic conversation. But Stu, would you be able to just give us a little bit of an overview? And I shared the website and the handbook with you in the chat. And so you have a reference point there. The program seems to be off to a great start and seems to be ranked and getting visibility at various levels. So I think it's encouraging to see that. And I know that many universities are trying to do something similar, and that gives probably some permission for them to do so. So thank you all for being here. And Stu, just maybe take it away the way that you feel like or wish.
Sure. And greetings to everyone. Maybe just maybe a little bit of the backstory of perhaps how it was even possible to try to do something like this. Because I think probably as many, I see a number of familiar faces on the call. So for those that know me, I'd spent the better part of 30 years, at sort of mainstream top 20 business schools like Michigan and North Carolina and Cornell and so forth, working diligently to try to bring this content forward in the MBA program and elsewhere, but primarily the MBA program with some success. But I think it's fair to say that it limited success, right? That most of the, perhaps all of the existing ranked sort of top 20 or top 50 MBA programs that I know of have taken some steps to include new content, usually in the form of second-year electives or research centers, run by one or two professors, with a focus on ethics or sustainability or corporate social responsibility, whatever it might be. And maybe a couple of elective courses or even a sequence, in the second year of the traditional 2-year MBA program. And I certainly spent the better part of 25 years doing that, right? Or starting a dual degree program like at Michigan, or a center with a few electives at North Carolina and Cornell. And I think that's all good, right? As far as it goes. But the metaphor that we had kind of my colleague Sanjay Sharma, who I'll mention more about in a moment, we'd sort of come to a metaphor that we thought captured this rather well, which is it's saddlebag sustainability. If you imagine a horse with a saddle on it, the horse is the conventional MBA program, and what we've been successful at doing at most business schools, kind of established business schools with profitable MBA programs, is to throw a saddle on the side of, over the horse with in some cases, big saddlebags hanging off the side, and what's inside those saddlebags is high quality. I don't mean to denigrate that work, because I think it's important work, but the fact remains that it's a saddlebag, and you can always just take the saddle off the horse and it's the same old horse. So what presented itself with the University of Vermont was, somewhat of a rare opportunity, and perhaps it's just kind of an important observation to make, that a la Clayton Christensen, maybe perhaps the places where it's possible to undertake complete reinvention will be those places that are, perhaps less visible, not so well recognized or ranked, that have MBA programs that maybe aren't the big cash cows. In other words, there's an element of incumbency here, just like an established industry, and that perhaps the disruption comes from below. So what happened at the University of Vermont was a new visionary leader came in as dean now 8 years ago, and that being Sanjay Sharma, who I've known for 20 plus years. He's a friend and colleague. We've written together. His personal passion is in business and sustainability. He was the dean at Concordia in Montreal, which is Canada's largest business school prior, and so the job came open at the University of Vermont 8 years ago. And, he and I were in pretty regular touch. We were working together. And, I'll have to confess that, as I said to him then, I didn't even know at that point that Vermont had a business school. so Vermont indeed has a business school. It wasn't at the time particularly well known or recognized. It was mainly an undergraduate program. They had an MBA program, but it was small. It was shrinking. It had begun to lose money. So it wasn't that difficult then for Sanjay, when he became dean, to eliminate it, which is what he did. One of the first things he did was abolish the MBA program. And that then, opened up the possibility of starting over again, right? Which was very much his intent. So he challenged the faculty to come up with a concept for a new MBA program that they could make stick, out there in the world. The old one was almost a purely local program, like an evening program for IBM. Used to have a big presence in Burlington, Vermont, and it was shrinking. So that's the reason that the MBA program was shrinking. So it had no reputation outside of Burlington or Vermont. And, he challenged the faculty to come back with an idea for a new MBA program that they could build international reputation around. And unsurprisingly, perhaps being Vermont, the faculty came, well, it ought to have something to do with sustainability and entrepreneurship and innovation. So long story short, the faculty committee was formed. Ultimately, they proposed the creation of something at the time that was called the Sustainable Entrepreneurship MBA, and it was unanimously approved. But then came, the challenge of actually doing it. So, you could easily say, let's launch a Sustainable Entrepreneurship MBA program and just keep doing what you were doing, but invite in Ben and Jerry's and Seventh Generation, and Keurig Green Mountain and Cabot and so forth, sort of the iconic Vermont brands as guest speakers, and then you're done, right? But that was not at all what Sanjay had in mind. Sanjay had reinvention in mind. And so he began, at that point, I had gone emeritus, early retirement at Cornell. And he asked me if I'd be interested in getting involved. So I started going as kind of an adjunct consultant now 6 years ago. And it was just too exciting a prospect to not roll your sleeves up, and so I got in deeper and deeper. And Sanjay being Sanjay, he was successful in raising money, brought in the single largest gift in the history of the university. I got the school, it's now the Grossman School of Business. And, we spent a year essentially starting with a clean sheet of paper, designing a completely new MBA program from scratch where every course is new, and from start to finish, the whole focus and purpose, it's a purpose-driven MBA program. The purpose of the business school is to develop leaders, change makers, innovators, entrepreneurs, focused on creating the environmentally sustainable and inclusive businesses of tomorrow, either through corporate transformation or through new venture creation, or through, fourth sector kind of NGOs that have, that seek to harness enterprise as a force for change. And all of the content, including the more conventional, important functional work, whether it's in finance or accounting or marketing or operations and so forth, is taught from this perspective. And then, of course, there's a lot of new content that you wouldn't typically find in a conventional MBA program around social inclusion and tools and techniques for achieving that, and around environmental sustainability and circularity, and around kind of base of the pyramid business. This is all in kind of core in the MBA program. And then it's a 12-month program. All the coursework's done in 9 months. The capstone is a 3-month in-venture in-company practicum. All the practicums focus on sustainable innovation. sustainable and inclusive innovation. And our aim then is to find the right people for this program, and recruit them, and then launch them out into this space. So, and I can speak more to both of those if it makes sense, because we quickly discovered that innovating the curriculum is one thing, it's really important, but unless you're able to find and attract the right people, and unless you're able to create a robust back end that is not just conventional MBA placement, with recruiters for traditional MBA jobs, then you really don't have anything, right? So we now think of this innovation as having kind of three components that are like a snake eating its tail. There's attract, there's develop, and there's launch. And the extent to which we're successful with launch influences attract. So let me stop there. That's a little bit of the introductory backstory.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. What it sounds like is that you're lucky in a way that you have a constellation in which a new program is necessary, a new leader is coming in that is able to facilitate that process, and you're getting the right kind of people in a context where that is already sort of the water. Would you say that is necessary? And what if we are not in a situation where all of these things come together? What would you suggest? And I think there's a question by, is it John Bunch? If you have to kill the old first to create the new, or is there some kind of way?
Yeah. Actually, this next week, so many of you are probably familiar with the GRLI, the Globally Responsible Leadership Initiative. So, which is it's a deans and directors kind of cohort, kind of deans of business schools and directors of MBA programs, with a focus on kind of embedding and incorporating, transformation and sustainability and purpose into MBA programs. So we're hosting that meeting this coming week in Burlington, and the Sustainable Innovation MBA program, in a sense, is sort of a case, that we'll unpack and try to, and with now 20 plus schools that'll be there, begin to think about what are the implications of that for change in their, in their school. And, I think, Michael, to your point, that in a sort of a strangely coincidental, kind of fortuitous way, all the arrows lined up at Vermont, right? That you had all of these system conditions that seemed to fall into place. And among them, I would also include at least a supportive central administration, right? There were a few naysayers, and there still are, right? And the community, right? So, but actually, the community is highly suspicious of business, right? So, the fact that the business school is creating this program, they're actually skeptical that it would be real, right? And thinking, well, it's just going to be another, kind of greenwash kind of thing. But I think we were gradually winning over, the community, that we're serious about what we're doing, that it's really about reinventing what business is all about, and that's what our program's focused on. So we had that set of, those arrows lining up too, in addition to a dean, whose vision it is to do this, a place that, didn't have all its chips on the MBA program, so there wasn't, a serious financial risk to eliminating it. It wasn't a big part of faculty load, so there wasn't a lot of faculty resistance. So all of these arrows lined up. And so to your point, okay, how many places have all of those characteristics? And the answer is not too many, although probably more than we think, right? That especially at the second and third tier, where we're going to see more and more consolidation, MBA programs and business schools just folding because that. Overall, the sector's in decline, I think, as we all know, right? The conventional MBA as a category is in decline. We're experiencing diminishing numbers of applications, not increasing numbers. And I'm happy to report that that's not true in our case, so we're experiencing growing applications to our program. So I guess my response would be, even if you don't have all of these kind of salutary and fortuitous circumstances in place, it's still possible. This is what we'll be talking about at the GRLI meeting next week. It's still possible to think about reinvention. Now, if your MBA program is just simply too important and too much of a key cash cow, both to the school and also the contribution you make to the university, then it's certainly not impossible to imagine just simply starting another program, right? Like a pilot plant, right, alongside, rather than just doing saddlebags, having a few electives in the existing program, why not create a new product, right? And stand it up alongside, the existing product. And we may discover over the course of the next decade that the new one is what rises and grows and the old one is what withers and declines, right? So I don't think it's impossible to imagine, the idea of new product development. And some schools have done that, right? That has happened in some places. I think that's a potentially viable strategy for those that, are more incumbent players, for whom, kind of taking the risk of trying to scrap the existing MBA program would just be financial suicide right out of the gate. It's the same thing for existing large corporations, right? That transformation for existing large corporations doesn't mean immediately shutting down the current core business. It means, incrementally improving it while you're creating the businesses of tomorrow. I think the same thing's true with business schools.
So we have a number of questions that sort of regard the generic outline, the structure of the program, etc. So I want to mention that Stu gave us links in the handbook, and it's in the chat. So if you have those questions, please check that. And maybe, Stu, you can still sort of give us a large overview of how you structured it. It's a one-year program, right? Yeah. And it does have, I think, what sort of, because we are in this process that you're suggesting, it's like we have an MBA program, but right now we're going to develop a separate program as a kind of alternative product innovation. Yep. And so we're looking at this also in a way, and then hopefully with the Jesuit network, there is a platform to spread it out. And I just want to mention this, which was part of a conversation that we had in December. You were saying that you and Sanjay and others in this space are not necessarily seeing this as a typical traditional competitive product development process, but maybe it is a collaborative one where we can sort of learn from each other. So that's why we're having this conversation, and you're generous in that sense that you're sharing this with us. So I just want to highlight that because this is atypical, and I think it has the huge potential of shifting this towards a collaborative advantage, right? And so how we can learn from each other. Would you want to share just some of the bare bones of how you decided why this would be a one-year program and how to arrange it in the way that you have?
Yeah. So, and thank you for saying that, because I should also share that from the beginning, right? The intent here was to create, a different model, right? A model for what perhaps business education ought to look like in the 21st century, and then not explicitly not try to protect it and hold it close. Our aim from the beginning was to create a model that could be shared, that in fact we want to spread it, diffuse it, not that we're arrogant enough to think that somehow this is the answer, right? That you just copy paste our program, because that's not the case. But I think the learnings, some of what we're doing is spreadable, is diffusible, is shareable, and that's what we want to do, right? So quite the opposite of saying we created this thing and now we want to outcompete everybody else. The intent here is to create a new category, right? And that everybody will be better off if it's seen as a category and not a few disparate, isolated experiments by, sort of crazy innovators. So it really is about creating a new category. So in terms of how we did it and kind of the underlying logic, we sort of knew, one of the other things that motivated us was that MBA education has become ridiculously expensive. And the 2-year model, obviously a lot of schools have gone to 12-month programs, as, especially for people that are full-time, executive MBAs and that sort of thing, or, weekend programs. So we knew that 2 years was a lot of opportunity cost, and that it was quite possible if you started over again. There's a lot of legacy content in the typical MBA program, in the core, that's just there because it was always there, and it fulfills, faculty teaching loads, and they're resistant to change because, they know how to teach what they're teaching, and, effort to change it means time away from research and writing journal articles, so it just doesn't happen. But when you start over again with a clean sheet of paper, it's like zero-based budgeting, right? That there's a lot of stuff in the existing core that really doesn't need to be there. That's not that crucial to a sustainable future. Just not that it's bad content, but just by way of example, in the typical operations core, you would typically have maybe even weeks of content focused on queuing theory. and optimizing the line, and including hand calculations, right? And in queuing theory. That's just one example of an area where we thought perhaps it wasn't necessary, right, in the operations area or green supply chain, sustainable supply chain area, to devote that much time to queuing theory, right? That yes, an MBA student probably needs to know what it is, and maybe would need to know where to go if that was ever an issue they had to confront. But for most of our students who are interested in sustainable innovation and entrepreneurship, that's not going to be something that they are going to do directly in their career. So you just simply don't do that. There are lots of examples of that in the traditional MBA program, that once you unpack it, you realize it can be much more lean, and you can easily deliver not only the core taught from a different perspective, but add a lot of additional content and do it in less time. So we were motivated by opportunity cost logic. 2 years is a long time. 12 months is much less opportunity cost. We were able to then compress it's 45 credits. Our MBA program is 45 credits. It doesn't need to be 60 credits. We are AACSB accredited, and that process was actually very smooth, and we got some really good feedback from the examiners. So it's 45 credits. All the coursework is done in 9 months. The program starts in August. There's a week-long orientation. We have some sort of pre-work for people that don't have much quant background. We use MBA math, to get people up to some baseline when they come in before they start. That's required, but we pay for it. They're required to pass through a certain number of MBA math modules. And then, it's really just all out, right? They're super big. The courses are all 1 and 2 credits. So the students are taking 6 or 7 courses at any one time. We're able to storyboard it so we can roll it out in a way that makes sense from a sequencing perspective, since we started from scratch. There's 4 modules, so they're basically half semesters. Each of those modules has 6 or 7 courses, 1 and 2 credit courses. Then we have what we call sustainability toolkit workshops, which also there are 3 credits dedicated to that, and they're spread out over the course of the year. And the courses run from August until the end of April in 4 modules. So we bring in a lot of practitioners. We have an Innovators in Residence kind of program, which is on Fridays as well, where we bring in people from the world of practice to spend time with the students. We have an advisory council. We have a Changemaker network, which is composed of practitioners who are willing to take a call or an email from our students who are in this space, kind of in the channels that we think we prepare people for, which are corporate transformation, purpose-driven business, B Corp world, inclusive and sustainable and clean tech venturing, impact investing and sustainable finance, the NGO kind of fourth sector, NGOs that harness enterprise as a force for change, and consulting, right? Those are the channels that we think we prepare people best for, and we populate our back end with practitioners who are living it, right? Who are doers in that space. And we don't talk about placement because, frankly, the idea isn't so much, since we're a 12-month program, the last 3 months being full-time in venture and company practicum, where students can travel. So we have practicums in Asia and Latin America and Africa and so forth. Not everyone wants to do that, but we have a portfolio of practicum opportunities. They're also domestic, they're local practicums, kind of domestic as well as international. But by compressing it to 12 months and then also dramatically reducing the tuition. So the tuition to our MBA program out of state is in the low 50s for the degree, and in-state is in the low 30s for the degree. So by compressing to 12 months and radically reducing the tuition, people graduate then in a shorter period of time, less opportunity cost, and with a much lower debt burden. So they graduate with something that looks more like a car loan, as opposed to a home mortgage, which gives them more degrees of freedom when they finish. They're not forced to go out and take, the highest paying full-time job just to service their debt and to make up for lost time, in terms of opportunity cost. So we view ourselves, given that we're a purpose-driven MBA program and we're focused on transformation to a globally sustainable economy. And what's the business's role in making that happen? Then the back end isn't so much about just placement into high-paying jobs as quickly as possible, a la U.S. News and World Report or Business Week criteria, that we think those are the wrong metrics, right? We would measure ourselves, and we do measure ourselves based on, from the perspective of the students themselves, the extent to which we can help them clarify their own personal purpose and direction they want to take, and then how well our program prepares to accelerate them down that path. And for some, they frankly don't want a full-time job when they graduate. We have a number of students who hang out their own shingle, who wants a series of project experiences in order to put more arrows in their quiver, to kind of fill out their own personal portfolio. They don't want a full-time job immediate. Some do, some need it, some want it, and that's fine, right? And so it's incumbent upon us to build a back end that we call launch, not placement, that facilitates, our students, because if we have the right students in our program, they're not coming into the program just to get their ticket punched to make more money. We're not opposed to money. Money's fine. Everybody needs money to live on. But we don't think the purpose of our MBA program is just to get people to punch their ticket for more money and a higher salary and to be measured on that as the measure of success. We don't think that's the measure of success. Right? So that's and as long as we recruit people that come into the program that know that's who we are and that's what it's about, then we have a good match of expectations.
Great. One question that is coming from the chat in some way, and one that I have popping up is, you decided to call it an MBA, which stands for Master of Business Administration. But the last comments you sort of mentioned is like, no, that's not actually what it is. It's like a new category you're mentioning in some way. My question is, what are the skills and other people are sort of the competencies that people get out of that still makes it a Master of Business Administration? Or are you trying to play a game here onwards and sort of refine the administrative skills into something else?
Yeah, it is a game, right? I mean, because, for better or worse, MBA is still a very recognized degree, right? So, and it is an MBA program. People graduate with an MBA degree, and it's accredited by AACSB. Having said that, the focus of the program and the content of the program is substantially different from what you would find in a traditional MBA program. Now, that doesn't mean that we've shed the need to teach marketing, accounting, finance, strategy, OB, management, leadership, operations. All of that's in the program, right? And it has to be, right? So there are a set of core, sort of core knowledge, skills, tools, methods that anyone with the MBA degree needs to know about. But we would tend to teach many of them from a critical perspective, right? That you need to understand, what discounted cash flow means and how to use it, but you also need to understand, what its toxic side effects are from the standpoint of of using business to create a sustainable world. And then you also need to be tooled up on alternative ways to evaluate investments. Like we spend substantial time on real options as opposed to just conventional discounted cash flow, internal rate of return kind of measures in the finance space. And that would be true in every area. So in strategy, where I designed we have there's more than one strategy course, and you can look at the actual curriculum if you go on the website. We lay out. You can see the names of all the courses, at least in the 4 modules. And in strategy, our main strategy course is called Business Strategy for a Sustainable World. And of course, you have to understand industry and competitive analysis and a number of other kind of conventional, call them, kind of mainstream strategy models and tools and methods. But, you need to understand them from a critical perspective and then add new ways of thinking about strategy that have a chance of taking us to the future. So, we've taken it upon ourselves to identify those kind of mainstream methods, tools, and techniques, that are embedded in the MBA DNA. And to be effective in business, you have to know those, right? If you don't know those, you're ignorant. But having said that, you don't just swallow them, right? You understand them critically, and you also understand their shortcomings. And then you add new tools and methods and techniques and models and ways of thinking that can overcome the shortcomings of those. So that was sort of the underpinning of our whole thinking about the redesign of the curriculum.
And there's another question about the purpose. How do you measure it, quantify it in some way if you need to? What do you, and how maybe do you attract people that sort of get that? What's your sort of filter, and how do you make sure that these folks that are coming on board are sort of aligned with that mission?
Really key question, Joe. So I'll be honest, right? I mean, when you're starting something like this, you can't be that choosy, right? I mean, you have to make sure that students meet some minimum hurdles coming in, right? You have to, right? So, but in the early going, you get risk takers, right? You get people, the first year you launch something brand new that has no track record, you get risk takers, right? And it's only as time goes on, we're now on our 5th cohort. So the composition, the number of applicants and the composition and the I guess I would say quality of those applicants continues to go up every year. We're getting more applicants. We're getting more applicants of higher quality, measured in a variety of ways, not just conventional, they had high grade point average and test scores, because frankly, we don't put that much stock in those metrics. There's some minimum, we don't have any hurdles either for grade point average or to standardized test score. We look to evaluate the whole person, try to understand them as a person, kind of their life story. Because, truth is, you can if you didn't do that great on your quant and the GMAT, but you were a math major undergrad and you've demonstrated you have the ability to grapple with that, you can overcome it, right? So we would evaluate the whole person on admission. We put a lot of stock on their personal statement and on their recommenders. And as time goes on, now that we've gotten the program in year 5 to the point where it's above break even, that's kind of important, right? Because prior to that, you're running in the red. The dean, is taking flack. The dean has to protect it, just like, a disruptive innovation in a company. You have to have a white space that's protected for a period of time, enough patience to get the thing to the point where it's above water. So we've reached that point now. We've developed some, kind of reputation and visibility with rankings that are consistent with who we are, like Princeton Review, Best Green MBA, and Corporate Knights Better World MBA. We've done very well in those. The types of students that we're after follow those, right? And we tend to fish in pools where, traditional MBA programs don't so much, because the truth is the growth, I think, in this new category is going to come from different pools of prospective students who don't even know they want an MBA. In fact, they may think they would never go to business school. Those are our prospective students. And as time goes on, we can become more and more selective, as we have more ability and we can add bandwidth at a staff level, we could begin to do things like make sure there's an interview ahead of admission. We already have people do on-campus visits, but we don't require it. But I think as time goes on, we would want this to become a much more selective process to make sure we've got the right people. You can never be 100%, but you do the best you can do, because getting the right people is critically important to being successful on the back end. They have to have the right, sort of personal drive and expectation of what the program can do for them. If you admit someone that really just wants to get their ticket punched, even though they tell a good story, they're not going to be pleased with the results.
And in what way, I think, does the launch phase, I get a number of questions here, we're getting a number of questions here on the launch, and especially the prospective employment story help? I know that you have companies in Burlington in around that space that can help with that, and I know that you have this advisory board that probably helps you create the connections and maybe the more dynamic space of personal connection with the students, and then maybe a way for them to be proactive about their own kind of launch. Right. In what way is that designed right now, and how is it successful? What kind of lessons learned would you be able to share, especially if we're not in a Vermont space where we have these kind of companies aligned around us necessarily? What would you share there?
Yeah. So we actually, probably around year 3, right? As you might imagine, the first couple of years, you're almost completely consumed just trying to stand up this new curriculum. I mean, that's a major undertaking. That, where you have essentially all new courses, and for faculty, they're in redesign mode. They can't just take their old course and put a new course title on it. So the first couple of years, you're really consumed with that, right? Just to be honest. And so you don't spend as much time on making sure you're admitting the right people. You're taking pretty much what's coming in the door, just to be blunt, right? And then not thinking so much about the back end in the early going, because you just don't have the bandwidth. But by the third year, you've got, this is the third iteration of the curriculum. It starts to settle down, right? I mean, between the first and the second year is always the biggest learning. By the third year, it starts to settle down a bit. Not that it's ever, just we don't want to ever freeze it, but you don't have the issues you did first couple of years. So now you can spend more time out there trying to actually go to the idealist grad fairs, and find the right people for the program, and then begin to really think about what would in year 3 we did some benchmarking of the MBA placement, career development and placement programs at established business schools, especially ones that we knew. And if you do that, one of the things you quickly discover is that in the established MBA schools, we'll call them the top 20, they have large career offices, right? And maybe 15, 20 people that are working in those career offices. And the vast majority of them, perhaps all of them, except for maybe one person, is dedicated to the recruiter. That's really where, because they're being evaluated by Business Week and U.S. News and World Report, it's really about the corporate recruiter game. So that consumes them, right, almost entirely. And they would typically dedicate one person to the students that they call, strangely enough, the impact students, right, which is code for won't submit to recruiting. And if you talk to those people that are the people in the career office, placement offices in those MBA programs who have been given the task of dealing with the impact students, you'll find that they're about to tear their hair out, because they're expected to know everything, about this very kind of emergent space. One person who's really a career, person is supposed to know about, B Corps, corporate transformation, NGOs, impact investing, the clean tech space and clean tech venture. I mean, they're overwhelmed, right? And they have students that have all of these different interests coming at them, and they don't really know what to do. So it became clear to us that we actually had an opportunity, just like with the curriculum, we had an opportunity to design from scratch an entirely new career development process that we call Launch, where the intent is different. The intent is, from the start, to help people clarify their own personal vision and mission, and what next step they want to take when they finish the program, because everyone is going to take a next step, whether, and the question is, how soon into the program can you decide what your next step is going to be? It's not your last step, it's your next step. So Launch now, we have our advisory council, and we had someone give us not a large, but a very important catalytic gift that gave us enough bandwidth to be able to devote some time to this. And last year was the first year that we launched Launch, right? And it had all kinds of warts and problems. So this year 5, is really the first year where we now have someone who basically is running Launch for us, who is an experienced career development person. So it's taken 5 years to get to the point now where we think we've got a process that really has a chance of working. And it starts on day 1 of orientation. There are assessments. We do a number of different assessments for the students. And then there are career workshops of various kinds and competency development workshops of various kinds. And then we try as quickly as we can to get them to choose one of these pathways. Like, do they want their next step to be a large corporation that's undergoing transformation? Are they interested in a smaller B Corp as their next step? Are they interested in getting involved in a venture or starting their own venture? Every year we have 2 or 3 people who use the program and the practicum to conceptualize and launch their own venture. Are they interested in the fourth sector, in the NGO world, in the WRIs or the WWFs or the 1% for the planets? There are a number of NGOs, EDFs, that have focused initiatives on business transformation. Are they interested in, sustainable finance and impact investing? We now have a track focused on that. Or consulting, right? There are growing numbers of consulting firms, many of them boutique, but some of the large ones too, that have practices focused on transformation. And to try to get them to say, yeah, that's what I want to do next, and then prepare them, kind of get them networked into that space. That's our advisory council, and that's the Changemaker network, so that they're in touch with doing informational interviews, doing, we have workshops focused on those different pathways. We view launch for us is we set the tone from day one. This is not a program where you get jobs handed to you, jobs falling into your lap. You have to be a hunter. You have to decide what it is you want to do, what your personal vision is, and then proactively go after it. We have all of the contacts, all of the networks, all that can leverage you into that space, but you have to go out and make it happen for yourself. That's what launch is all about.
Great. We have a lot of questions in the chat, which I'm trying to summarize. It seems there's a lot of interest in the practical instrumental piece in terms of what you just mentioned in terms of launch and potential partners and how setting up potential connections with other networks can help. And then another piece is around curriculum and content. And I think a number of questions are around the notion of faith and the whole purpose, and how do you understand your role in this world and where that would fit in. I see another set of questions in terms of content around governance, and I'm probably misinterpreting a number of these questions. So at some point, I want to just invite everybody to raise their hands in the chat here so that you can ask those directly. But can you share a little bit about specifically the content piece in terms of how people are sort of seeing themselves and tapping into their purpose? Has that happened before they apply? How does the program support it in a consistent manner? I know that the launch you mentioned has a number of elements to that, but throughout the content, in what way is that reflected?
Right. So we're not faith-based, right? So when we speak of purpose, we do not posture that in a religious context, because we're not a religious institution. We would follow very much more kind of the purpose-driven business way of thinking about it, and it's premised, I think, on sort of our underlying conceptualization of where business transformation seems to be headed, right? And I would kind of put that in sort of three concentric rings. There was the 90s kind of eco-efficiency, being less bad, as Bill McDonough would say. CSR, kind of we need to do something on the side philanthropically in the communities where we operate, is sort of level one. We don't focus on that so much, even though, that students certainly have to be aware. Most companies now have, pretty good, that's embedded, right, in most companies. Certainly not all, especially if you get out into the world. But that's sort of level one. Level two is what I've talked about as beyond greening. It has more to do with transforming competencies that are inherently unsustainable into converting and developing new competencies that have the potential to be inherently clean and regenerative, and then commercializing them, and then thinking about how we serve and reach the underserved at the base of the income pyramid, kind of in base of the pyramid inclusive business. And our curriculum has a lot of content focused on that, both understanding it conceptually, but then also models, tools, techniques for getting to that, right? The kind of competency building in those areas, specifically in those areas. And then I think the final ring and kind of what really unites the whole program and where we're headed, I would say, is, kind of the Larry Fink, letter to CEO mentality, that it's time for these world challenges, the SDGs and so forth, not just to be kind of interesting, EH&S programs and companies, or new product development initiatives, or new R&D projects, or new, like we're saying, kind of new white space initiatives, but rather it's time for this to become the purpose of the company, right? That it is really about corporate transformation to serving the world's needs. That is core corporate purpose, and that as a way of thinking and as a way of doing business is what centers our program. But it's important to have those two other layers, which are much more initiative, programmatically based, tool based, and so forth, to have those as part of your toolkit.
Okay, great. We have about 50 plus participants. I'm just gonna play with this now. There are a number of questions in the chat that we may be able to get to, especially if any of the questions that I try to summarize don't address your concern. So if you would raise your hand in this, or just unmute yourself and wade into this conversation, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, there's just a ton of chat questions here that,
right.
Wow, I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, so there is a lot of interest, which is great, and this is fantastic. And I thank you so much, Stuart, for opening this up, because I think what is really empowering me in this conversation from what you're sharing is that transformation that you just mentioned in terms of the Larry Fink narrative, and how that should be part of the traditional corporate conversation much more so than what we're talking about, entrepreneurs, white space, and that. Do you see anything happen on that front with the program that you're having? Are corporates reaching out to you in that vein? Are people reaching out for the students? Are they coming to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and frankly, we're reaching out to them, and some of them are as they learn more about us, reaching out to us. And frankly, those are the only businesses that we're interested in working with. Mm-hmm. That's it, right? I mean, our tagline is transforming today's business, creating tomorrow's ventures, and so we're agnostic as to whether we get to a more sustainable world via transformation of large corporations or B Corp or new venturing. We think it's all hands on deck. It's all of those. Right? Those are our pathways. So we're out to build relationships with all of those types of companies and consulting firms and impact investing institutions and NGOs, right? That share that kind of DNA and share that vision. And the better established we get, the more practicum projects we do. People who are interested can also go on our website. You can see all of the practicum projects we've done for the last 5 years. The new ones for this year are just been posted. We have 13 practicum projects we're doing with companies this year that range from large corporations, like REI, and we've done projects with PepsiCo and Facebook like 4 years ago, not anymore. We've done projects with Ingersoll Rand, so large corporations that are undergoing transformation. Then we've done practicum projects with more B Corpy. Every year we do a project with Seventh Generation and Ben and Jerry's, and they're both Unilever companies now, so Unilever is very much part of our network. But then with ventures too, so we're learning. More and more entrepreneurs make their way to us, so we're stumbling upon really interesting ventures in the clean tech, circular economy, and inclusive business space. I have this thing called the Base of the Pyramid Global Network, right? And so that has also been very helpful in turning up interesting ventures that we could structure practicum projects with our students, but also companies that are out there in the world making this stuff happen. We've done practicums with companies outside the U.S. They're not all U.S. companies. Ventures outside the U.S. in Asia and Latin America and so forth. And as we grow the program, the intent always was that it was a globally focused program, not just a Vermont program, but it's very much embedded in Vermont, right? And and I think we're also part of what's happening in Vermont in terms of the transformation of Vermont itself, right? Where there's a lot of momentum around just Vermont as a transformational example at a state level. We're involved in that too, but we don't limit ourselves to that. And the only way this program really gets traction is if it looks outward, is globally focused, and then, as you say, is looking to partner. So I see some of the chat is about, are there other like Global Compact and so forth. We've connected up with, some of you might be familiar with the One Planet Education Network. So we were part of Prime, but Prime, I would say, is much more geared towards saddlebag sustainability, kind of going for numbers. And I actually spoke to that effect at the meeting 2 or 3 years ago. And, and out of that came the link up with One Planet Education Network and Tony Cook that some of you might, so this might be, so One Planet Education Network kind of spun out of a WWF initiative that started in Exeter. Some of you might be familiar with, kind of reinvention of the MBA program at Exeter. A new dean there sort of slowed the momentum, but out of that came the One Planet Education Network. And One Planet Education Network now is dedicated its focus on trying to multiply the number of MBA, disruptively innovative MBA programs that seek to reinvent business education. That is the focus of the One Planet Education Network. We're very much involved in that, as is kind of the few other known quantities like Presidio, in the US, or BARD in the US, Exeter in the UK, CMR in Bangalore, Monash in Australia, and a few others. And a very interesting experiment at the University at Texas A&M Central Texas, believe it or not. Very interesting new experiment going on there. And I know Tony, who runs the One Planet Education Network, would be very interested in more collaborators that are interested in starting disruptive new MBA programs in their institutions.
Stuart, can I ask you something? I'm sorry, because Michael said we can just unmute.
Sure.
I just have one curiosity, because I went to this meeting last year. I'm from Italy. So in Italy, they passed the B Corp law right after the US. So there's a lot of growing sustainability jobs. But something that I was worried about from the statistics that we got here is that, it's great that they don't have to make the same money, and we want a purpose-driven MBA, and we want purpose-driven people. Those are the kind of people we want in those programs. Like I did a PhD that was on sustainability. Those are the people that we want. But then sometimes, and maybe it's different in the States, but the roles that are out there are not exactly what we're expecting. So I'm just wondering if there's something we can do or work on. We need to put these people out there. There's like a climate change strike today. So, we're getting there, but if there's something we can do more, because I think that the more people we prepare that way, the better it is. The more we promote it, the better like the economy maybe can make a difference.
Yeah.
We can make a change.
No, you're exactly right. And I think it's one of the reasons why starting small is well, it's just a reality, but I think it's also really important to start small, because if we were instantly in the mass production business of graduates, we would fail, right? Because there simply is not the infrastructure for hiring people in this space, right? Just to your point, right? So what we've discovered with Launch is that, as you build relationships with companies, a lot of the big companies only recruit at a select number of highly renowned top 20 business schools, right? They have designated schools they recruit at. So as we build relationships with some of those companies, they're unconventional relationships. It's not with the recruiters, right? It's in other parts of the company where it's possible to bring people in different, where they bring them in explicit. It might be coming into, we think of it as the functional gateway, right? In many existing corporations, you're not, unless you get hired by the chief sustainability officer or something, which is really limited, and that's not our objective necessarily. We're looking to train people who are going to be business innovators, right? Not staff people. Not that we're opposed to that. That's fine. There are some jobs like that, but that typically what happens is they get hired in a large corporation, established corporation, into a functional post. Start with, it might be in marketing, it might be in operations. They'll be hired into a function somewhere as a starting point. But having said that, the motivation for bringing them in was because of their training background and passion. First, to have an impact on that function itself, right? The person who's hiring them is bringing them in specifically for that purpose. And then ultimately they have a pathway, elsewhere in the company, right? They can migrate within the company, and there's the expectation that they'll do that. So it has to do with the kind of the slow but necessary work of building different channel relationships in these existing companies that are non-traditional, that are not just the recruiter network. Because the recruiter network is designed specifically not to hire people like this.
Stuart, I have a question for you. And when you were launching the program that you have launched at Vermont, how did you deal with institutional challenges, particularly bringing other faculty who may not be as passionate about purpose-driven programs and sustainability as we are. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here, into the fold. Did you have training and outreach efforts in the College of Business faculty to educate them, or what did you do?
Yep. So, and thank you for that question. It's having spent a lot of time, trying to do this sort of thing, but running my head into the wall, right, at those other institutions where I spent time. So we were left only with saddlebags. What was so interesting about the opportunity of Vermont was you had a business school that was hungry, right? That it was not a particularly well-known business school. It was under-resourced. It was heavy teaching load, mostly undergraduate teaching. There wasn't much resource for faculty to get out there in the world, even go to the academy meeting or that sort of thing, when Sanjay first came as dean. So there was a sense among the faculty, right? And many of them, and it's not as though there weren't really high quality faculty there, because there were, and many of them though were there because they loved living in Vermont, right? They, had it not been Vermont, they probably would have moved on, right, a while ago. But they could see that this idea of creating a new MBA program focused on sustainability was an opportunity to really put the school on the map, for it to go somewhere, for it to elevate the school, for it to bring more resources. And as a result, they weren't resistant, right? There were faculty who were already there in pretty much all the functions who were interested from the start, right? Which is very different than what you would find, in top 20 MBA programs, where you would more typically get the stiff arm, because people already have resource, they're already busy, they already have a 3-course load, they don't see how it benefits them. It's just going to disrupt their life. Whereas here, the faculty could see that this was a real opportunity. And over the last 5 years, as we've grown kind of in reputation, it's allowed us to hire new faculty for whom this is their personal purpose, right? So, it's like 38 faculty in the school. The number hasn't increased, but since Sanjay has come as dean, over the last 8 years, we've hired 10 new faculty. And wow, pretty much all of them were attracted to the school for what we're doing with SIMBA, and also the transformation of the undergraduate program. So we have a real critical mass of faculty now in the Grossman School of Business for whom this is their personal interest and passion across all the functions. Finance, accounting, OB, strategy, operations, marketing, you name it, right? Across all those functions. But we also reached out, it's not just business school faculty teaching in the SIMBA program. The Gund Institute is at Vermont, which is pretty well known. It was Bob Costanzo was the founder, so the whole field of ecological economics, really got lift, through the Gund Institute. But the Gund Institute now has expanded and is a university-wide institute focused on the SDGs. So there's still an ecological economics program, but the Gund Institute is now campus-wide. I'm a Gund Fellow. We have other business school faculty who are Gund Fellows. But then we have, professors involved in the Gund Institute at the Rubenstein School for the Environment, and Community Development Applied Economics, and then also at Vermont Law School, and also from engineering, who teach in the MBA program. So since we were able to start with a clean sheet of paper, we could design it in such a way that those perspectives came in from the start. And at least for now, this could change. It's a lockstep program. There are no electives in the MBA program. It's a lockstep program. We're already beginning to differentiate it a little bit more, right, in that we now have a track on sustainable finance and impact investing that has some specialty content. But it was really important in the early going, when we only had 20 students, when we launched the program, that you couldn't afford to have electives, right? So it was a lockstep program. We're now in the low 40s, and so we're above break even at that tuition level in the low 40s. We don't want the program to get any bigger than 45 or 50, because then you lose the intimacy of it. Then we're faced with the question of, do we want to scale it beyond that? Do we want to go to a second section? And that's actually kind of a real strategy question that we just had an advisory council meeting last week to talk about that. We've just launched an online program, a certificate program called Leading Sustainable Innovation, that brings nuggets of content out of our MBA program into an online environment with a simulation and with a back-home project that participants do. It can be people from companies anywhere in the world doing it. That has the potential to scale much more quickly than, if you think about it, than the MBA program. That if we're able to turn out 45 or 50 really high quality change makers out into the world every year in our in-residence MBA program, that's pretty good, right? I mean, yeah, we could perhaps think about going to a second section and take it to 90 or 100. That's a possibility, but that has real faculty implications, real staffing implications. It also has real implications for our ability to launch them into the kinds of high quality opportunities that they want and expect. So these are sort of all strategy questions that we're wrestling with right now.
Wonderful. I'm sort of mindful of the time. It's 12 o'clock. This hour sort of passed very rapidly. I know there's so many questions in here that's indicative of the interest. So I know that Fordham is dedicated, committed to having more of these conversations. Thank you so much, Stuart, for this. And I consider this only a start and a continuation of a conversation. We might have the possibility at the Academy of Management or the pre-conference. And so be mindful of that. Everybody that is interested in reaching out to have more of these conversations, please feel free to reach out to me, Michael Pearson at pearson@fordham.edu. I thank you all for being part of this conversation. Thank you very much, Stuart. And I'm sorry for those questions that didn't get answered yet, but that just requires us to have more of these.
Michael, is it possible to capture all those questions?
Yes, they are in the chat, and I'll sort of
they're in the chat. Maybe if we could get them off the chat and maybe capture, because I think there's a lot of good questions there.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful.
Great.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great Friday evening. Ciao, ciao.
Bye now.
Bye, bye.